On and off. Glen's grandpa had just passed away at the hospital. Since his grandma said she didn't want to be alone that first night without him, Glen and his younger brother, Ted, decided to spend the night at her house. On their drive home, their grandma told them stories of his grandpa from when they were younger. "You would never know it now, boys," she said to him, "but your grandpa used to be quite the troublemaker." She told them all about how he used to play jokes on her and her friends before they were married, and how he would tease them. "He eventually calmed down when he became a grandpa," she told them. "Of course, age was catching up to him anyway." Glen's grandma put a pillow and a blanket on the couch for Glen, while Ted was sleeping in the next room in a sleeping bag. After Glen's grandma turned out the light, Glen pulled the blanket up to his chin and began to doze off. Just then, the light turned on. "Glen, do you have an extra pillow?" he heard Ted say. "Here, you can have mine," he said, sitting up and handing his pillow to Ted. Ted turned the light back off, and Glen fell asleep. A few minutes went by, and suddenly the light turned back on. "Ted, what do you want now?" Glen groaned, not even opening his eyes. Then the light turned off. Glen was just about to fall asleep again when the light turned back on. He could hear somebody snickering from the doorway. "Ted, this isn't the night for this," Glen moaned, burying his face in his blanket. "Go back to bed and stop messing around." Then the light turned off, but before Glen knew it, the light turned on again. "Cut it out," Glen said, raising his voice. "Go to bed." Then the light began turning on and off, faster and faster. "Knock it off," Glen shouted. "Turn the light off." Then the light turned on and stayed on. Glen decided enough was enough. He pulled the blanket off his face, sat up in bed, and gasped. Glen's grandpa stood in the doorway, smiling, with his finger on the light switch. Before Glen could do anything, the light turned off. Hangman's Bridge. Jesse had just joined the college frat. He didn't have many friends yet, but they all seemed like fairly good guys, and he was excited for the coming semester. There was just one thing. All the other guys told Jesse that he had to go through an initiation before becoming a real part of the frat. They told him that the only thing he had to do was to go down the old gravel road that led to a place called Hangman's Bridge to prove he had what it takes to be in their group. Jesse had heard of this place before. It was an old spooky tale that he had grown up hearing. The story talks about a young man about Jesse's age who had walked down to the old bridge and hung himself over the side because a girl had broken his heart. Even now, the place was said to be haunted. That night, the rest of the guys dropped Jesse off at Hangman's Bridge and told him that he had to spend the night standing on the edge of the bridge. Then they told him that they would be back to pick him up in the morning. Jesse was not much of a believer in spooks or haunts, but after the other guys drove off, he couldn't help but feel a little creeped out when he saw the bridge. It was a dark, chilly night, and the only sounds were the creaking of the trees and soft trickle of the creek that ran below the bridge. The bridge itself was very old, made of large stones held together with mortar. Jesse climbed on top of the stone edge of the bridge and stared out into the creek. It was getting colder as time went on, so Jesse zipped up the front of his jacket. For a while, nothing happened. But then Jesse heard something. At first he thought it might be the wind playing tricks on him, but then he could hear it clearer. It was a voice that seemed to come and go with the wind.
Who is waiting on Hangman's bridge? Oh, young one with his life to give.
The voice cried. "Who's there?" Jesse called out, his voice trembling. In the darkness, he could not see if anyone was coming. All he could do was stand there and wait. And soon the voice called out again.
Who is waiting on Hangman's bridge? A young one with his life to give.
Now it sounded like the voice was closer. Jesse took a step back. Some of the smaller loose stones from the bridge fell into the creek, making small splashing sounds. Jesse took another step back. He wanted to run, but was so frightened he felt like he was frozen. Once more the voice called out.
Who is waiting on Hangman's bridge? A young one with his life to give.
Jesse took another step back. Then the voice screamed,
Who you are?
Jesse screamed and fell off the edge of the bridge. Just then, several of the young men from the frat came out of the woods laughing. They had been hiding out there all along, calling out to Jesse as a practical joke. "We got you, Jesse," one of them yelled as they walked up. But Jesse did not answer. When the young men looked over the edge of the bridge, they all stopped laughing. The collar of Jesse's jacket had gotten snagged on the bridge as he fell. He had hanged himself.
If you enjoyed listening to those but wanted to experience reading the stories for yourself, you should check out the link in the description because we have an Etsy page and David's book is on there. Now, in addition to all of his short stories and poems, this book also features some incredible artwork, so check it out.